All right, this is the final prep session for the Algebra 1 Regents tomorrow. Today's Tuesday afternoon. This is for the Regents on June 23rd, tomorrow, Wednesday. So before we get started, let's do a quick recap of what we talked about today. We're going to look at the June 2017 if you came in late. Remember we said materials-wise. Let me just go through the slides for today. Material-wise, pens, pencils, ruler, other stationary stuff, erasers, whatever. The only thing that I could say definitively is make sure that your graphs are in pencil. Listen to your proctor for instructions. They do change things year to year, like, oh, make sure this is in pen. Usually what they've done in the past is any other written has to be in pen, but your proctor is going to explain all that. Just make sure you listen. The only thing I could say 100%, make sure your graph is in pencil. If your graph messes up, can't fix it. Okay? Don't bring your calculator. We said do not bring your calculator. Don't bring your calculator. You're going to be given one. Mr. Nello or some of the secretaries are actually going through right now. They're resetting all the school ones and they're putting diagnostics on. Probably going to double check anyway, so you might as well. Remember, that's mode, stat diagnostic. Just make sure it's on. And that's what it takes supply-wise. Maybe bring a bottle of water, some hard candy or something, but I wouldn't bring like a tuna hero or something like that. All right, let's start with the June 2017. So this is the one you guys got the multiple choices back for. This was kind of a weird year. Some like weird ones in here. Starting off with like number 1. Which one only declined between 10 and 40? Choice 3. You have to look specifically between 10 and 40, only declining. Like 4 is close, but there's a section where it's increasing. 1 is stagnant. It doesn't decrease. It just stays at $4. $40 profit, I guess. The only one that's decreasing between 10 and 40 is choice 3. I didn't post this yet. No, I'm gonna be doing all that. It's gonna take me a good like half hour or so of posting all the answer keys after we're done with this. There's a bunch right now, but all the other ones. Next, we have a literal equation in number 2. It said, which term of this formula is not dependent on the height? The answer is choice 2LW. Literally, basically, this question is saying like, what is not, H doesn't have any impact on which. So for choice 1 with A, H obviously impacts that because that's literally the dependent variable. Choice 2 is the answer. It doesn't have an H component. And choice 3 or 4, obviously the height is going to have an impact on those expressions. Choice 3, I mean, if you know even the basics with square root graphs, you don't even have to graph this. 1 and 3 are quadratics. Choice 2 is linear. Which one is x minus 2? Choice 4 here. Yeah, the multiple choice was weird for this. I would say just maybe pick a Regents that we haven't done yet. Do some practice, like we said. Look over the packet. The Regents packet is a good idea because that had a little mix of everything. Look over I forgot to mention this, look over the, what is it called? 25 facts. The 25 facts tonight if you do want something to like study. But in terms of, I would just kind of do practice questions. Rate of change. When we see rate of change, what are we thinking? Slope. So the slope is negative 0.09. So that means the average number of sleep per day decreases 0.09. The phrasing is very weird here, awkward. Hours per year of age. It's decreasing because it's going down, so it can't be 1 or 3. Choice 4 says, choice 4 has the wrong slope. So you can kind of work your way through this one without understanding a lot. Okay, number 5. If you evaluate, number 5 is a function notation question. So if you evaluate f of 3, that means plug a 3 in for x. Okay, we get negative 2. You could use a y equals here. I'm showing how to actually do the calculations. You end up getting 14. Who is correct? Only Lynn. What did Jude? Jude was 4. And Anne said plus or minus 4. I forgot. Where is 4 coming from? 4 would be if you did negative 18. I'm forgetting how you could have got 4 with this one, but basically just a function notation question. Without the F3? Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe solving for it equals 3. Does that work? Yeah, I forgot. Okay, for number 6, we have a dots question. We're factoring. Look out for different bubbles. Be careful of like choice 1 here is gotcha. You just, don't really understand dots, but that's the basic of like plus and minus in your bubbles. Exponents, remember we cut them in half. So x to the 4th becomes x squared and x squared. Dots. All right, this is another one where you can kind of like eyeball figure it out, if that makes sense. So like I'll go over how to actually do everything here. But you can kind of eyeball like number 2. It's not linear. Okay, choose out. 3 would be a quadratic. 4 would be a cubic. Like this just looks like an exponential. They just happen to cut it off at 0, 4. But that alone can kind of get you there. If you want to be more definitive, look at the pattern. That's why I circled the values. 0, 4, 1, 8, 2, 16. Right? This is very clearly a pattern of multiplication, choice 1. Remember, in an exponential function, the number out front is the y-intercept. The pattern of multiplication is that base being raised to some power. Okay? Yeah, we're looking at the June 2017. If you came a little late, we'll start another one, the June 2018, but I figured this one works. All right, a system with no solution. When you plug it in, if you were doing this and you're like, oh shoot, this isn't working out. I got 12 equals 0. Remember, sometimes that's the case. The answer here is that there is no answer. You get a false statement that's 100% false all the time. 12 does not equal 0 ever. You didn't mess up. It's just that this system has no solution. These are 2 parallel lines. These are 2 parallel lines. Now, let's say you plugged it in and you got 12 equals 12 or 0 equals 0. What would the solution be then? If you plugged it in and you got 12 equals 12, what would the answer be? Yeah, infinite. So if we get like something that's always true as opposed to always false, it would be infinite solutions. Very good. Number 9, we've seen a few times that came up in our function lesson. Not a function. X repeats here. When I say X, we're talking about the months, obviously. Yeah, that's an easy gimme. All right, this was, I think, the do now yesterday, right? How many times have we seen this? Like, oh, what's the equation if these are the roots? Usually they give this as a picture. This one, they even label it for you. So I wrote zeros and then factors. Notice how the factors is like the unsolving thing. So x equals 0 is just x. X equals -3 is x plus 3. X equals 4 is x minus 4. That's like undoing the t-chart. So choice 3. There's not even like a box method involved in here. What would it look like if it was a exact answer? Huh? Which one, Grace? Number 8, huh? Oh, and like 3 or 4, I guess. It would depend on the problem. Like if it had an answer, whatever the answer is. If it had something that you can solve, basically what was happening, the problem is that the variables cancel out. If the variables didn't cancel, then all of a sudden you're going to get an answer. Because then it would be like, oh, 2x plus 8, something you could solve. If the variables cancel out, it's going to be one of 2 cases, something that's always false or something that's always true. That's not good. Okay. For number 11, just inequality stuff, translating the words maximum of 40, less than or equal to, at least 250. That alone got you this problem. Maximum of 40, at least 250. So the answer here was choice 1. Money used as coefficients in the money inequality. Have a nice one. Substitution. So how I'm solving number 8, I use substitution. See how it already said y equals? Why would I want to do elimination? Not wrong if you did, but I plugged in where it said y, 2x plus 8. Yep. For number 12, and invested $1,000, 1.3%. So we have growth. Make it 0.013. Don't forget the 1. So 1.013. What equation represents that? Choice 2. This is easy. Choice 2. Let's go through the wrong ones. What's wrong with 1? That would be if it was decay. What's wrong with 3? What's wrong with 3? They messed up the percent. They just left it as 1.3. Same thing with 4. They used and twice. Huh? Oh, and the Regents? Yeah. The Regents likes and. For number 13, solving inequality, and then look at the choices. So don't just not a good method to say, oh, I plugged them all in. It probably works for you, but it's a little probably faster. Solve it. You get x greater than 10. We flip the sign. And now which choice is greater than 10? Only 11, choice 4. Only 11, choice 4. Okay, solve it and then check to see which one fits. Correlation coefficient is the strongest, 0.9. 0.9. Closer you are to 1, the stronger, or -1. Doesn't matter. Remember that trick question on the stat test, like 0.91 versus whatever, negative 0.91 versus 0.9. The closer you are to 1 or -1, it doesn't matter. The stronger the relationship. Basically, the largest absolute value. This is a good example of a one-var stats question. So anything that refers to median, standard deviation, does that come up in this one? Yeah, standard deviation people are asking about today. That's utilizing L1 in your calculator, L1, and then just hitting stat calc one-var stats. Remember what an outlier is. That ends up being the answer here. An outlier is a value that strays, far from the other values. And that's going to impact the standard deviation. Standard deviation basically tells you how spread out the data is. Okay? Because sometimes, the average can hide that. I might say, hey, the average was an 80, but there's people that got 20s and there's people that got 100s. Standard deviation tells you how spread out it is. What do you press to get L1? Stat, enter. Evenly spread would be like, there's nothing, there's no outliers. There's no cutoff, it's just kind of eyeballing it. I mean, if everything's in like the low 60s here, 79 is a little bit of an outlier. There's no set number, yeah. You could just do process of elimination too if you're not sure. It doesn't matter that it, like choice 3, oh, there's 159, everything else is above that. No, it's like right next to all the other numbers. It doesn't matter that it's below 60. Okay, yeah, maybe I'll screen share my calculator and we'll just go over some stuff in a minute. For number 16, I think we had this question on some quad test or something. Review maybe. You can cross off choices 1 and 3 because we know that this is a negative quadratic. So right away, 1 and 3 are gone. Now it's between choice 2 and 4. So where is the vertex? The vertex is at 15, 25. So these are all in vertex form, which is nice. Which choice has a vertex at 15, 25? Choice 4. Roman numeral. Choice 2 has a vertex at -15. Remember your IHOP rule. -15, -25. Why they made the numbers so weird is so that you can't type this into y equals and look. That's why they made it a little bit bigger than like a 10 by 10. So we know it's negative a value. We know where the vertex is. So we just use that to our advantage. This one was easier than it looked. And what's up?
If you got 0.5 for a strong correlation, a correlation coefficient, then what would it be?
Moderate.
Oh, okay.
Like neither, like in the middle, basically. Neutral. Like it's not strong, it's not weak, moderate.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, with standard deviation, there's 2. There's sigma x and there's sx. Sx is sample. Sigma is population. They're both standard deviation. To be honest, most of the time they're going to be very close to each other. I've never really seen a question where it made a difference in knowing the difference between the 2. The June 2019 had a question. Do I have that one available? The June 2019 had one. Let's see if I'm right. I think so. Yeah. So look, this is the first time I saw this. I was like, whoa, do they actually need them to know the difference between the two? Even look at the answer choices. Even if you confuse them, you're like, which one is it? SX? Is it sigma X? It was like 3.5 versus 3.4. They're going to be like very close all the time. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't make a big difference if you know the difference. Or just remember that. Hey, SX, S sample. It's easy as that. S sample. You don't need to know when to use each one. Yeah, you don't need to know that. No. No. Okay. For 17, I think I put this question on a test. What's true about f of x versus g of x? So f of x is another back-to-back like vertex form questions here. F of x has a vertex at 3, 2. IHOP rule, 3, 2. AOS is x equals 3. In g of x, I could see the vertex is 3, negative 5. So they don't have the same vertex, but they do have the same x value, which we call the axis of symmetry. Axis of symmetry. So they both have that x equals 3 as their axis of symmetry. Choice 3. 17, choice 3. For number 18, this is kind of like a sequence question, a recursive rule. How would we describe this rule in words? This is saying starting with 2, the rule is to multiply by negative 5 and add 2. So you see I set up like a little assembly line. Whatever I get, I plug it into the next one. This is a recursive, they're kind of making like a recursive sequence into like a function, but basically the same thing. Remember the relationship between this and this. What is the relationship there? This doesn't mean like distribute negative 5. No, all that is saying is, hey, one term and the one before it, or the next term or the previous, depending how you look at it. Yep, exactly. You notice you don't see the word sequence in this question, but that's basically what it is. It's a recursive function, same thing. Okay, we have solving an equation. So what could you do for 19? I showed how to solve it the real way. Anytime you're solving an equation, whether it be a quadratic or a linear, you could plug in the choices. If you're really not sure, you can type this whole thing into your calc, plug in an 8.3, and see if it makes it equal, the left expression and the right expression equal to one another. Studio, they probably wouldn't ask, that seems like a super specific example. They give you 2 test scores and they say who did better. Like they wouldn't, that seems kind of random. Lucas said, you plug it in, but the value isn't there. What do you mean, Lucas? Oh, here? So like, yeah, I would actually put the number there. Yeah, I wrote f of 1, but what I'm really doing is putting a 2 there. Here, I'm really putting a negative 8. I just wrote f of 2. Okay. Student, you don't need to know like when. The only thing you would need to know with mean and median is the idea that like maybe median is better if there are outliers present, because the mean would be affected by outliers. It's kind of subjective to say who did better. All right, we did this question just last week, so well, I didn't even circle it, but the answer was choice 4. Remember with these weird conversion questions, you're looking for units to cross cancel. You're looking for units to cross cancel. One characteristic of all linear functions is that they change by equal differences over equal intervals. That's a confusing way of saying constant rate of change, like delta y over delta x, right? Equal differences over equal intervals, right? Basically the idea that they have a slope. Equal factors means like times 2 times 2 times 2. Equal difference is like plus 5 every time x goes 1, plus 5 every time x goes 1. So choice 3 here. Be careful if you put choice 1 for 21. 22 is a good example. Look at the choices. Am I even going to bother factoring 22? No. So what are your 2 choices? I personally would use CTS, even b value, the constant's already gone, or you could do quad formula. CTS is going to save you the heart canceling step, and it's nice because b is even. It works out very, very conveniently. You would add 16 to both sides. You factor. Can't even simplify 26. So this is a scary one, but it's really not so bad. If you did quad formula, you'd have to do like the hard thing. Your radical was like 64 minus, what was your radical? 104? 104? Yeah, like radical 104. You have to simplify. You have to do the hard thing. CTS is faster. Okay, 23. We did this question, blood flow rate. Which one is not, or which one can't be derived? So remember, logic-wise, we said, hey, one of these has to be incorrect. They're like two totally different values. So you could quickly pick out, let me just solve for R. And the one that's incorrect is choice 3, because 4 is what it would actually be. And last but not least, with multiple choice, if you're throwing something in the air, what's an appropriate domain? So how would I do this one? I would type into my calculator. Remember, you can't type t, so type x. Negative 16x squared plus 24x. I would go to second graph to see the table. And I would notice that the domain starts obviously at 0. And you're not going to see 1.5. You'll notice that at x equals 2, it's already negative. So you know that this event is ending between 1 and 2 seconds. And that limits your answer right there. What's wrong with choice 3? Because choice 3 is saying the same thing. What's wrong with choice 3? Choice 4 is the range. Yeah, domain we want, like in a normal problem, domain is the x values. In this case, it's the t values, right? 3 has like the y. 3 basically is saying y. So, oh, what's the domain? Oh, y values are between 0 and 1.5. No, it's the x values, or in this case, the t values are between 0 and 1.5. The domain is time. Range is height here. So 3 and 4 right away. 3 and 4 are out. Is it between 0 and 9, or is it between 0 and 1.5? The event ends between 1 and 2 seconds, so you know it's going to be 1. And you could verify that if you want to mess with your calc settings, but you can answer that one pretty easily. All right, questions with the multiple choice. If you just came in, we're looking at the June 2017. Do you have any general questions as well? Yeah, so I actually showed like how to solve this one too. Like time starts at 0 and it stops when it hits the ground. It hits the ground at 1.5 seconds, so it's between 0 and 1.5. Questions with multiple choice questions. All right, next one, simplest form. What does that mean? So we're gonna distribute the negative here. I'm gonna combine like terms, and I'm gonna write my answer. I don't know if they took off for this because it doesn't say standard form, but just to be safe, I'm always gonna write it in standard form, like 5x squared comes first and then minus 10. Don't factor it. People do that sometimes. They're like, oh, now let me do GCF. If it's not asking you to factor, don't factor it. I remember grading this year and like people wanted to factor that. Just leave it. They're not saying to factor it. Why would you factor it? Okay. Graphing a quadratic. Do you need to show the table? Am I going to lose points? What did I say today? If you're in doubt, just show it. And what I've been teaching you the whole year is anytime we do a graph, we show a table anyway. But no, it's technically not required. Plot your points, nice and neat curve. We can take off for sloppiness. If it doesn't pass to your points, if it looks like you had a seizure as you were doing it, like we're going to be taking off. And what is the vertex? -3, 9. One silly thing, hopefully we know this by now, but when you're writing a coordinate, if you don't put parentheses, it's wrong. If you just wrote -3, 9 with no parentheses, that's wrong. So anytime you write coordinates, parentheses. Now we talked about this last week. When you're asked to explain if something is rational or irrational, first of all, what does explain mean? I got to use words. Obviously, you can't really do any math here anyway. So I got to add a little bullet point. I have 2 variations. So first of all, I wrote irrational. I have a 0 right now. I have a 0 if I just said irrational. Irrational is correct. So this is all in the explanation. So one thing I said was a rational number, like 7, and an irrational number, like radical 2, will always have an irrational sum or difference. In other words, this is the case like I plus R or I minus R is always I. The simple go-to for any question, this is what I would like more highly recommend, even though I wrote it second here. Is it rational or irrational? It can't be expressed as a fraction, A over B. where a and b are integers. That's your go-to. It can or can't. So just taking away the little apostrophe t. It can be expressed as a fraction, or it can't be expressed as a fraction. Obviously, you can give much more detail than other ways, but that's a good go-to. Could you just say, I put it in my calc, and it could not be expressed as a fraction? Yeah, you could say it's a non-terminating, non-repeating decimal. Non-terminating. I would just say stick to my suggestion. Rational decimals either terminate, that means stop, or if they do go on forever, they repeat. Like 1/3, 0.333 goes on forever. So you can't be like, oh, it doesn't stop, but it does repeat. So it goes on forever, it has to have a repetition in it. So irrational are non-terminating and non-repeating decimals. Explain, Kyle, is words. Justify is show your work. It's very simple, my man. Explain is words. Justify is like do some math. Show your work. Solve this equation. Justify. Like show your work. All right. This one is, I mean, pretty cut and dry. What's the percent? If the bubble is 0.85, what's missing from it being full? So right now it's saying, hey, 85% of the value is there. The answer is not 85. What's the percent of decay? 15. What's missing from it being 100%? What's missing from it being a whole one? 0.15, which means the rate of decay is 15%. It did say give your answer as a percent. So if you said 0.15, I think you got a 1 out of 2 here. I'd have to double check the model responses. So if you said 0.15, you're not really giving a percent. I'm going to assume you mean 0.15%. You'd have to say 15 or 15%. This one you guys recognize. This was a two-way frequency table you had to fill in. We got pretty good at these. This is almost like a little puzzle. 100 tells us the bottom right. They tell us 60 watch sports, so right away we know 40 didn't watch sports. I show in red like my calculations. 34 didn't like pop, so I know 26 goes above that. I'm like adding 34 plus something equals 60. And then you kind of figure everything out. The trickiest part of this was knowing how to do 70% of something. Just multiply it by 0.7. You get 28, and then just figure out everybody else. For question 30, whenever you're graphing a linear inequality, jot down your 4 pieces of info. First of all, you had to get it in y equals form. Distribute, move the 4 over. Your slope here is -2. Your y-intercept is 4. Luckily, the part 2s are all pretty easy here so far, right? Nothing crazy. Dotted line, dash line, and we shade below. With your shading, just like this, is perfectly fine. Do you need to label it? No. But like I said, if you're in doubt, just do it. Technically, you don't need to label here. Make sure that your shading goes to the line itself, just like this. You don't have to extend it like crazy to the edge. You can if you want, but just like this is fine. All right, this is a good example with like reading the instructions, like algebraically, justify, blah, blah, blah. So determine the values of x that satisfy this equation. That's all it says. Hey, here's this, here's that. Determine if you, and this, I remember this one in the answer key. If you just wrote this on your paper, you got a 2 out of 2. Notice it didn't say algebraically, it didn't say justify, it didn't say explain your answer. This just said identify. What are the x values that make this work? 0 and 1. So you could have typed this into y equals. If you just wrote what I have on the screen, you got a 2 out of 2. Yeah, most people, I know, most people would show their work, but I'm just saying because of the phrasing here, like if they added the word algebraically, you'd have to probably do it how I did it. If they said show your work or explain or something, you have to say, oh, I used y equals, I used the intersect feature, whatever. Okay, so how did I do this? I set them equal to each other. I made a little quadratic, and I was like, oh, GCF. I don't really want to do quad formula on this. So I pulled out an X, a T-chart. The answers are 0 and 1. If you just had one of these answers, you got a 1 out of 2. So if you're like, you recognize the 1 part, but maybe you forgot to set this equal to 0, which people do, you got a 1 out of 2. And last part 2, IHOP rule comes up. What does it do when you subtract some a value, some constant? it's going to move it a units to the right, whatever the number is. It's going to move it to the right, whatever a is. What if you do a outside of the absolute value bars? Now it's going to move it down. Again, whatever a is. That was a really easy part 2. Part 2 is really easy on this year. The multiple choice was weird, but the part 2s are simple. What does it do inside the bracket? IHOP moves it the opposite direction, so to the right. What does it do outside? It's just going to move it down. Questions with the part 2s? Let's read the instructions. We haven't done this because they keep these the same every year. Let's just read the part 3 instructions. Answer all 4 questions. We know that there's 4 4-point questions. Each correct answer will receive 4 credits. Clearly indicate the necessary steps, including formulas, diagrams, graphs, charts, etc. Utilize the information provided for each question. Note that diagrams, A correct numerical answer with no work will only receive only 1 credit. So if it's like a quad formula question and you just have the answer, nothing literally on your page, you're going to get a 1 out of 4. You guys know that. And look what it says here. All answers should be written in pen, except for graphs. So I do know what I'm talking about somewhat, which should be done in pencil. Like I said, I don't know if they're going to change things, so just listen, please, to your proctor tomorrow. This is what it was in June 2017. This is what I'm used to, but who knows, what they'll say tomorrow. If you are using a pen, don't use a weird normal color pen, black or blue. Don't use like a purple pen or pink pen or something. Okay, use factoring. So this one, they're telling you a specific skill. This is kind of random because usually they just say the word algebraically. Kyle, if you mess up, so let's say you wrote this in pen and you're like, oh shoot, I wrote it wrong. You just go like this. Put a solid line through it. You don't need to go like this. Okay, just put a solid line, and then someone grading it, Mr. Sweeney, Mr. Smith, knows that they're not going to consider that. Just put one solid line through it. Put one solid line through it. Okay? Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't be like, I'm going to do all the written in pencil because I want to be safe, and then I'm going to trace over in pen, because then you're going to waste 30 minutes plus tracing things in pen. Don't do that, please. If you make a mistake, cross it off. I'd rather be sloppy and have time than like you spent an hour tracing over your work. Science is different than math. I'm talking about math. I'm not your earth science teacher, Kyle, okay? So using factoring to determine the zero. So for factoring, we're going to do x plus 3, x minus 3. Some product rule, make my little chart over there. We use our t-chart. We get x equals -6 and x equals 3. Yeah, again, Jasmine, this is for math class. Science is I'm not your science teacher. So for math class, just listen to what I'm saying, okay? What do the zeros represent? The zeros, like what does zeros mean in terms of graphs? Zeros are where the graph hits the x-axis, or where y equals 0, where it intersects the x-axis, however you wanted to phrase that. Yep. That's fine, Sarah. And yeah, Helen, everything except for graphs. Like I said, I don't know why we're talking about pens and pencils for like 45 minutes today. But to be honest, if you, let's say, because this happens, like someone will email me like, oh my God, I did the whole test in pencil. Like, am I going to fail? To be honest, it doesn't matter, but this is just technically what you're supposed to do. And someone asked in 722 earlier, like, why do we, basically it's when you do it in pen, it's kind of like securing what your answers are. Let's say you're going to argue like, oh, someone changed my answers. The teacher hated me. They erased it and they changed it after the fact. If you did it in pen, you can't really like change anything. That's just saying why they had that. Okay. It's kind of a weird one. What could be happening? We have a distance versus time graph. What's happening in DE? So DE, he's going a little bit slower. Oh, no, sorry. When was he driving in the city? He was driving in the city most likely in DE. Think about it like driving in Manhattan versus like driving on the expressway, right? Going through Times Square. You're going to be going slower. How do I know he's going slower? I don't have a speedometer on me. I see that the slope of the line is a little bit more gradual. The steeper it is, the faster he would be going. The steeper it is, the faster he would be going. And then there's a follow-up for this. This was a little tricky. What happened in BC? That's easy. We know when we see the horizontal line, that means you're not moving, so he stopped for lunch. I don't know if I would necessarily say he stopped at a stoplight, because notice he was there for an hour and a half. So that must have been a really long light. Or like, oh, he stopped to tie his shoe or something, right? It has to kind of make sense. So maybe like he stopped off to get gas and had lunch. He stopped off at a friend's or something. Yeah, stop to take a nap. We don't really care. As long as it's something where it's, makes somewhat of sense. And then what was his average speed? So average speed, we need to know your distance over time. In other words, if it took me 20 minutes to run 2 miles, my average speed was 10 miles an hour. So how far did he go in total? Look at the end of your graph. In total, he went 230 miles, and it took him 7 hours. So we're going to do 230 divided by 7. Be careful of rounding. It does say nearest tenth. So if you circle this, you're wrong. You're going to lose points for that. 32.9. Craig totals his car and had to buy a new car. Someone said he checked his text. That was a long scrolling through his phone for a while. Okay, this was a little sneaky one. And we did one like this on your quad test. So a little bit of a trick here. It comes in the question, and you guys saw this. What's the trick in what I'm highlighting? What's the trick in what I'm highlighting? Yeah, it's not saying where do they equal each other. It's saying where does g of x equal 2 times k of x? Where does it equal 2 times k of x? So you have to multiply k of x by 2. I wrote, likely it's not going to factor. Could they say that and then it works out nicely? Sure, but I'm saying like, hey, when I see nearest tenth, I'm already thinking in the back of my head, oh, this is going to be kind of ugly. Now, once I get it in standard form, I make the executive decision. All right, let's just quad formulas. So write down A, B, and C. Copy down quad formula from your reference sheet. Plug in. I don't really care about simplifying 177. So I'm just going to type that in my calculator. 1 plus rad 77 over 4. 1 minus 1 minus rad 177 over 4. Nearest tenth would be 3.6 and negative 3.1. Yeah, this was the weird follow-up for this. That by itself could have been 4 points. Why did you choose your method? What did I write? I wrote, it was not factorable, so the quadratic formula was required because this always works. Kind of a weird question, but I don't know, did anyone else do it differently? It said algebraically, so if you did CTS, you could have been like, hey, I did CTS because I really like it. What was your question? Someone had a question. Natalie, what's your question, Natalie? How do we do linear regression? I'll do the calculator after this. I'll pull up my calculator and we'll talk about some stuff. It probably makes more sense if I have that up. Okay. Let's just finish this. We have like 2 more. This one. Ooh, okay. So Michael has 2 options. He can add $100 or he could double it. So you have to write functions. Now they don't give me any, remember we talked about using names, they don't tell me anything, but I wanted to make it clear which one's which. So notice I give some like labeling, hey, option 1, and then I have A of X, then I have option 2, all right, that's B of X. Option 2 is obviously exponential if you're doubling, starting off with 10, that's 10 parentheses 2 to the X power, and then we have a linear if you're just adding $100 every week. Now, a little tricky, which option will let him reach his goal? The answer is both. Sometimes we tend to think of these as like one of them has to be right and the other one doesn't. Both of them, he'll reach his goal. In week 7, he'll reach his goal with $710 for option 1, and same thing with option 2. Obviously, you probably prefer option 2, but hey, technically, if he only wants $700, both of them will reach his goal. You don't need to make a table. No, I was just showing the values. You don't need to make a table for this one. Any other questions with this one? This one was a little weird. This is a good example of one where people will write the expression because they're so focused on it, and then they forget to write an equation. It says write a function, but write an equation. They'll just write like 10 plus 100x. That's not a function. You need an equal sign. Also, I would make it clear which one's which. If you just wrote y equals 10 plus 100x and y equals 10 parentheses 2, someone grading is going to be like, which option was what here? But be very clear, organize things a little bit. Questions? All right, and last one. This one was a system, right? So we had a system. This was a nice start. You didn't have any naming stuff, so I used f of x and g of x. Starting off with 5 members, add 10 members a year, so 5 plus 10x. And then starting with 35 members, you add 5 members a year, plus 5x. Okay, 2 out of 6 right there. If you write a system correctly, 2 out of 6. Now we had to graph it. This was unlabeled. So I noticed the numbers are going to get pretty big here. So I went by 5 on the y-axis, and I went every other on the x-axis. Now there's no right or wrong answer, but it has to be appropriate. If you did like some scale and it didn't even fit, and you don't see the intersection, maybe be like, oh shoot, I should have went by something different. Plan that out ahead of time. You should be looking at your tables, your calculator, and be like, all right, hit at 6. These get up to like, almost to 100. So let me go by something a little bit larger on the y-axis. You don't just randomly set a scale. You're going to plan that out ahead of time. And this was a weird follow-up. Let's see. For people who looked at the model for June 2017, you know what I'm talking about. It says, explain. Kyle, what does that mean? Explain in detail what each coordinate of the point of intersection of these equations means in the context. Ooh, we're throwing a lot of things out here. In the context of this problem. So what I wrote is, in the 6th year, both swim and chorus teams will have 65 members. If you just wrote 665, can anyone tell me what's wrong with that? So basically it's talking about the intersection. What's wrong if you just said 665? Yeah, and also said, it gave you two hints, like, hey, give a little bit more than, they would have just said identify the intersection. They said explain, and they also said in context. Now, this was weird, but technically, you didn't even need to say 6 or 65 for this one. One of the models had that, I believe. I remember that. You could have just said, oh, it means that in that year, they'll have the same amount of people. Notice it doesn't say what is the actual solution. Now, most of us would just say it anyway. We would say, in 6 years, they both have 65, something like that. But technically, you didn't have to specify the numbers. You could just say, oh, it means when they'll have the same amount. Yeah, so say exactly what Sarah said. Yeah. Kind of like a poorly phrased question, because this should have been like, make sure to specify the number in your answer or something. All right, and check your graphs for people that actually sat and did this. What do you think I mean when I say check your graphs? What's the only thing I didn't talk about? Talked about scale, I talked about label. If you forgot to label 5 out of 6, you lose a point. Notice I use function notation, so I just have to put f and g. If you wrote y equals, you have to write the whole equation. But I labeled, and that's it. Okay, this was the June 2017. This will be posted. I'm going to sit right after this is done and go through all the postings of Regents we haven't done yet. Yep. You can label for all graphs, it's just unneeded. You forgot arrows. Did you go, Sarah, did you go to the edge of your paper? If you go to the edge of your paper, that's actually fine. If you stopped before the edge, then you would need an arrow. Just a good rule of thumb is just to put arrows across. But yeah, so yeah, you would lose a point. You'd lose a point. All right, so let me open my calculator. I'll share this. Share. We're obsessed with standard deviation and pens and pencils. That's some weird. Why is standard deviation so popular? Question 1 on the Regents. What's the difference between population and standard and sample standard? That's a little bit of like a more advanced calc thing, but there's videos on that if you want to watch it using matrices. Okay. That's somewhere on my YouTube channel if you want to look for that, but that's a little bit more advanced. All right, so basic stuff on the calculator. Stat, enter, am I sharing? Yeah. Stat, enter, list one, L1. That's going to make up some numbers. Type in 4 numbers. If we want basic stat stuff, we hit stat, calc, 1var stats. Let me just hit this. The top one, x bar, is our mean. And then the other ones we care about is sx and the one below it. Now in this case, because I had so few numbers, they do vary a little bit, but they're traditionally going to be very close to one another. S of x is sample. Sigma x is, it looks like it's 0, but sigma x is the population standard deviation. So you don't need to know when to use each one, but maybe if, like I showed you that question from the June 2019, it did say population, but like I said, you got the answer whether you knew it or not, because they're usually like within a decimal of each other. But don't get too obsessed with that. And then we have our 5 stat summary, more so for box plot stuff. I don't want to confuse people with this, but if you're asking, so I'm looking at the do now for today. I'm going to do this once and very quickly. For matrices stuff, if you hit second x1 for matrix, you select enter. You make a 2x3 matrix. You type in your system, just the numbers itself. So this was the do now from earlier. Oops. They have to be lined up. You quit, you go back in, and you're going to select under math RREF. And then you're going to select matrix A. And this will solve it for you. If you remember, those are the answers from our do now for today. Again, this is not something, obviously this doesn't count as algebraically. This is a little bit of like a more advanced way to solve systems on your calculator. Don't let this confuse you, please. I do have videos on that. Thank you, Kyle. Found the video. Is my video or rando? Is this me? Yeah, it's me.
Shopping cheap.
Oops. Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, so Kyle has a video on it. Like solving a system, let's say maybe Chelsea, like a multiple choice. So like, do you really care if you do elimination or not? If you're good with this, you're more comfortable. It's to find factors of numbers, you do the number over x. Yeah, so if you're having trouble with some product on your calculator, oops. If you're having trouble with some product, you're like, what multiplies to, I don't know what multiplies to 120. You would do 120 over x. And now when you go into your table, you're like, oh, 2 and 60, 3 and 40, 4 and 30. You can do it that way. If a question doesn't ask to do it by hand, we don't need to do it by hand. Or is it expected? Kyle, again, just pay attention to the phrasing. Does it say algebraically? Does it say justified? Does it just say, hey, what's the answer? Oh, wait, how do you find roots on your calc? So that's the 0 one. So let's go over that. So let's type in a quadratic. Let's type in a quadratic. If you have your calculator out and you want to follow along with me, hopefully this works. Okay, this is a good one. So your calculator has a 0 feature. It's second trace and then choice 0. And this is that left bound, right bound thing. And this matters. Usually we're just like, oh, hit enter for intersect, and I'll tell you. If I want this root over here, when it says left bound, I have to be to the left of it. So technically that's up here. Hit enter. When it says right bound, I have to be on the right of it. It doesn't matter if I'm all the way down here, if I'm right here, as long as I'm on the right-hand side. Notice in light blue, if the root is between those, I did this correctly. If you messed it up, it's going to say like error, like, hey, we can't find a root between the window you gave us. Now, if I want the root on the right-hand side, when I do left bound, just hold the left and right keys to move it. Now left bound is actually below the x-axis. See how I'm to the left of the root? And now right bound, I'm going to exaggerate and go really far. I'm off the screen, but technically I'm to the right of the root. Notice how between that window, there's the root. Hit enter. The one downside to this, it is going to give it as a decimal. So if it's a question with radicals and stuff, you would then just have to convert it. Other calc stuff while we have it out. If you need to change what your table goes by, or you want it on ask, if you're like, hey, I don't feel like scrolling to 100, turn auto onto ask. And now when you go into y equals, you can type, it looks like it's blank, but you could just type in any x value you want. Maybe if you want a table of decimals or something, this is a good way. Just make sure to either reset it or put it back on auto. You can Lindsay, but what if they're decimals? You're not going to see them. Rachel, we talked about standard deviation. Did you miss that earlier? We talked about that. We said SX versus sigma. Oh, what is for? It describes the spread of the data, how spread out it is. The lower the standard deviation, the more closely compacted it is. The higher the standard deviation, the more spread it is. So if you're looking at two samples of something, like let's say class 722 and class 723, if 723 has a lower standard deviation, that doesn't mean like, oh, they're better, they did this. It means their scores are less spread out. They're more closely bunched together. A higher standard deviation implies things are more spread out. Things are further apart from each other. Okay. Other questions with calculator, random stuff? Please no one ask about standard deviation again. You don't need to know how to make a decimal into a radical. Let me switch back. Any calculator stuff? Because I'm getting like random. Anything else with a calculator? If you do get a decimal, I don't know, I'm making something up. If you get a decimal and you want to know what that is as a fraction, hit math, enter, enter. That doesn't really simplify very well, but it will put it in simplest form for you as well, which is nice. If you want to type fractions into your calculator, alpha y equals. And what was the other way? What's the way it doesn't work for me all the time? What was the other way? Alpha x or something? Alpha x. Oh yeah. It doesn't work on the school ones, alpha x, so be careful with that. Just use alpha y equals if it doesn't. Alpha y equals. Okay. How to go to settings. You hit the setting button, you hit the mode. So let's say you get your calculator tomorrow and someone messed up the secretary's misters. See where it says stat diagnostics? Just double check that it's on. And then get out of here, quit. It's second mode. You multiply. So the negative does something different, Scott. So the negative is just going to reflect it. It's the absolute value of the number that's either going to make it wider or skinnier, whatever you want to call it, narrow or wider. So if the absolute value of the number is a fraction between 0 and 1, your graph is going to get wider. If it's anything larger than 1, your graph is going to get more and more narrow, increasing as it gets larger. So the negative doesn't have any impact with width. The negative just reflects it. Yeah, kind of like parentheses. Just narrow. Vertical stretch. I would just say narrow. You just say narrow. All right, let me get back to my iPad. We're taking some random questions. Yep. Luke's asked about CTS. So CTS, let's do one. Okay. So let's say I already moved the constant over. So what's CTS? We need to know, what's that? I call it the magic number. Then someone last week was like, what's the imaginary number? I call it the magic number, not imaginary. The magic number that you're going to add to both sides is always going to be half of B. So half of that, which is -8, squared. So as a little shortcut, like I don't even worry about the sign. Yes, I know it's -16, but if you're squaring it, you could just be like, all right, 16 becomes 8, and square that becomes 64. The number you're adding, notice I put plus before I even started. It is always going to be positive. Now on the right, you got to do your math there. You get 84. On the left, your bubble is just going to be x minus 8. This relationship is always going to be a 2 to 1, or basically just half. If it was 16, it becomes 8. And notice the sign matches. It was negative, it stays negative. Now, what do we do from here? Let me just clean up some space here. What do we do from here? What do we do from here? I'll zoom out then. What do we do from here? Take the square root. If all you have left is something squared, take the square root. Raise the roof. Take the square root. Okay, 84, you could either simplify it at the end or you can simplify it now. Let's simplify it now. Does 84 have any perfect squares that go into it? It does. Good job, Brian. What perfect squares go into 84? 4. 4 goes in 21 times. That's going to become 2 radical 21. 2 radical 21. If you're not sure, do like the same thing as what Chris was asking with like some product. Do 84 divided by x in your calc and go to your table just to be like, oh wait, this did go in. Move the 8 over. And that's your answer. That's your answer. Ryan's going to get 100. I assume that's what most people have been doing. So yeah, go ahead. Are my eyes malfunctioning? What's wrong with my eyes? Rankin said that. What was your question? How do we solve if it's two variables, like 2x squared plus 2x equals what? That would be a quadratic, no? 2x squared plus 2x equals like 1 or something. This is a quadratic. Equals 0. So GCF. Set each of these equal to 0. Yeah, normal quadratic.
Hi, guys. It's me and Brooke here. Good luck tomorrow on your Regents. Oh, my. You guys are better than my students using the chat. I'm highly impressed. Good luck tomorrow.
Wait, how would you get x plus 1? GCF. GCF. And then you're setting that equal to 0, so you get x equals -1. Jimmy, you wouldn't have to do something like that. You wouldn't have to solve like a cubic. You wouldn't have to solve a cubic. Oh, is it on January 2020? Was it just a GCF? Let me see. What question was it, Jima? Number 9. Oh, is that just like a root one? Let's see. Number 9 said, what are the zeros? Oh, okay, yeah. This is just GCF. This is what Jima just asked. So this is a good example. Set it equal to 0. Right now, the only way to factor this is what they have in common. So you pull out a GCF of x squared. That leaves behind x minus 9. And then we could do a t-chart. Actually, here, hold on, let me see. If we pull out an x, we get x squared minus 9. No, that doesn't work. Okay. So GCF. And then there's nothing else you could really do there. Now, when you set these equal, you get your little mini equations. You're going to get x equals 9 and x equals 0. So 0 and 9 are your only answers here. So if it does look scary, Jima, to answer your question, it's more than likely, like, there's not going to be some weird way, like, oh, we never learned how to solve this. It was just basically the same thing as a quad, like factoring with GCF. Mr. Lee. Yeah, I assume so. I don't think I've met him. Nathan met Mr. Lee. Wait, what? Yeah. I'll be in the career tomorrow morning. So I'll see most of the remote people. Vertex would be using the axis of symmetry. Yep, if you did want to show your work for vertex, do your negative b over 2a, and then plug in to find the y value. Or you could search for it in the table. Yep, Chelsea's got it. Chess has got it. I don't know, because like they get in at 8:30, so they just have homeroom. Like they, you know, when you guys listen to the announcements and stuff. All right, anything else? Yes, she does. The properties. What properties, Krish? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Okay. I thought we were going to like one last thing. Properties, I think you mean this. Is this what you're talking about? So this is like a commutative property. Associative property deals with how we group things together. So associative would be like anything where you notice, obviously, I think we all know distributive property. I don't have to go over that one. So we have commutative, associative. Anytime you're like adding something to both sides, that's the addition property of equality. Any other operation is like that operation of equality. So if you multiply both sides of an equation by 2, that would be the multiplication property of equality. Distributive property, we know what that is. Something over parentheses we pass out. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. So that was just basically summing up like what happened. So like, oh, when she was solving it, she added 9 to both sides, so that, or she distributed, so distributive property. I forgot what year that was from. Subtraction when she minus 5 from both sides, subtraction property of equality. Oh my God, number 15 on January 2020. Didn't we do this one? Number 15 on January 2020 is this. So isolate the squared part, Jama. So move the 2 over. And then I'm going to use square roots. So take the square root. What's the square root of 9? Plus or minus 3. Now when you move the 4 over, you're going to get x equals -7 and x equals -1. $29 on the 2020. Thanks, Chris. 29 on the 2020. Let's check this one out. Chris is asking properties. Okay, so what's the first blank? So notice how the parentheses went away. That's going to be the distributive property. You just say distributive property. And then the next blank. So what happened in the next blank? They moved the 14a over, right? So that would be the addition property of equality. This was even easier than like the commutative and associative stuff. No, those aren't super common, Wenzy. I haven't seen that really asked. All right, did I miss anything? Chris, did that answer? So here, let me just share what Chris is asking. Hold on. And I'm going to post all my answer keys, so hopefully that will clear things up too. Didn't we do the January 2020? 29? Okay. So this is 29. So you basically just have to fill in the blanks there. So what happened between the given and the second line? The 4 got multiplied, so what do we call that? That would be the distributive property. So the first blank is just distributive property. That's it. Now that third blank, they say combining like terms, they give you that. What happened in the fourth line, going between the third and fourth line? What happened? What happened? They obviously just moved the 14a over. But what did they actually do? They did like plus 14a on both sides. What allows you to add something to both sides of an equation is called the addition property of equality. The addition property of equality. That's it. So blank property of equality. If you multiply, multiplication property of equality. If you subtract, subtraction property of equality. Yep. Think about what you did. So this person added, that would be the addition property of equality. Damn, why are you obsessed with January 2020? Let's see. Didn't we do this region? I'm not tripping. We did this one in class? Oh no, oh, this one was different. Okay. Figure 1 represents the first term. How many will be in figure 35? So what you would do here is write an explicit rule. So is this the exact same? Yeah, they use the same diagram, which is weird. 12, 16, and 20, right? So your pattern here is plus 4, so that's your common difference. Your first term is 12. So your explicit rule is going to be 12 plus 4 to the times the n minus 1 in parentheses, times n minus 1 in parentheses. And now when you plug in a 35, it becomes a 34. Let's see. 34 times 4 is what, 136, plus the first term is 12. The answer should be 148, choice 2. So write the explicit rule. That's given to you on that little reference sheet. Don't forget to rip out the reference sheet. Don't forget to rip out the reference sheet. The formula is A1 plus D times n minus 1. A1 plus D times n minus 1. Yeah, you can put addition property. All right, guys, I'm going to end it there. I want to get all these answer keys uploaded for the people that aren't here now. I have all of these for every year, every question. No, I've never seen anything like that when Chris was asking. All right, guys, have a good one. I'll be uploading stuff, so you'll see a bunch of things come up. Have a good day, guys. Good luck tomorrow. I'll see you. I'll pop by everyone's room, but good luck. Get a good night's rest. Let's kill it tomorrow. Good luck. Get the dress right.